Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you everyone for joining us. We have with us Ambassador Lawrence Silverman, a retired Foreign Service officer with 30 years of experience in that field. He was former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, and he also served as the US Ambassador to Kuwait from 2016 to 2019. We also have Dr. Eli Abu Aoun. He is the director of the United States Institute of Peace, North Africa Programs, and of the MENA Regional Hub in Tunisia. Dr. Eli was serving previously as the executive director of the Arab Human Rights Fund, and he is known to have led many humanitarian and development projects in the MENA region, as well as serving as an observer of the September 2022 parliamentary elections in Kuwait. Our third speaker for the day is Mr. Leon Shehabian. He's a principal with Global Insights Group, an advisory service firm based in Virginia, and a Gulf watcher affiliated with the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, in Washington, D.C. And he also served as an observer of the September 2022 parliamentary elections in Kuwait. The closing remarks today will be given by my dear friend, Sheikh Sabah Mohammed Sabah Al-Salim Sabah, who is the co-founder of the Harvard Club of Kuwait and was its president from 2020 until 2022. Thank you everybody for joining us today. Ambassador, what is your opinion about the role of the parliament in the political life of Kuwait?
First of all, shukran. Thank you very, very much, Abdulaziz. Masal khair jamian. The parliament or the National Assembly in Kuwait plays an important role in the image that Kuwait projects overseas, because it is unusual in the region, this elected parliament. And you know, one should never minimize that that a country goes through an election in a very peaceful, orderly manner, has a result, and then you move forward based on that, on those results. That's we sometimes take that for granted, but we really shouldn't, because, as you know, it doesn't happen everywhere, and it really is a unique within the region, a unique facet of Kuwait, and particularly you will hear Americans, or let's say American congressmen, cite the parliament as one of the reasons why they have generally a favorable opinion of Kuwait. And then, of course, as an American, I think that parliaments in general are extremely important to the political life of a country, and a necessary part. And they can play an important role in policy making. They are representing constituents. They are obviously popularly elected, and that's of course part of the role that is played by the National Assembly. For example, this National Assembly has to approve a budget like some parliaments do. I would say most. Obviously, our Congress has what they call the power of the purse to control finances, and in this case, the National Assembly has to approve budgets, or you have what we would call continuing resolutions. So to use the budget from at last year's level. And there is an important role in general in oversight in policy making, to contribute to policy making. The government has the Kuwaiti government obviously has the main role in making policy. The parliamentarians are there to oversee, to offer opinions on it, and to hopefully work together with the government to create policies that are in the interest of the country. So it's an important factor to have a parliament where we, the United States, are represented in countries. U.S. ambassadors are represented in countries that do not have active parliaments. We obviously say that is part of democracy, and it's part of dealing with addressing the needs and the wishes of the citizenry, of the constituency.
How is our democracy distinctive from other democracies?
Within the region, it's unusual to have this level of popular participation and election, as you know, in a parliament, as opposed to, for example, a consultative council, let's say, and to have a very active campaign. And campaigns in Kuwait are very active, and they should be from our point of view. To give you, there are differences, obviously, between us, our Congress, our Parliament, and yours. For example, when I was nominated to be ambassador, I had to be approved by our Senate. And in Kuwait, that does not happen with ambassadors. You are giving, but other elements, in terms of other elements of the government, the Parliament is giving confidence, no confidence in the cabinet and or individual members of that cabinet, and we've seen that many times in Kuwait. There, I would say, compared to the United States, it's maybe not as involved day to day in policy making. But again, our system gives the president very strong powers, maybe akin to your prime minister, certainly, and to but not quite, let's say, to His Highness the Emir or His Highness the Crown Prince. But our president is generally more powerful in terms of actual constitutional powers than most prime ministers, in most parliamentary, let's say the Westminster system. So there is that difference. But if you look around, and again, this is a positive for the image of Kuwait abroad, the parliament is speaking its mind and has the potential to influence policy, although obviously the government has the lead on policy, and then it comments through things like, obviously, confidence votes or just questioning of members of the cabinet, whatever level. Our Congress, obviously, I had to testify, for example, as a deputy assistant secretary to Congress on substantive questions. So that exists as well, and it depends on how active the parliament is and that interaction between the government and the parliament, the executive branch and the legislative branch.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I will move to Dr. Ili Abu Aoun. Could you please elaborate on your experience viewing Kuwait's democracy and on your visit to Kuwait?
Yes, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Well, the voting centers that we visited, I did not witness any serious incident or breach. We've noticed that the voting process was more or less smooth. I've also noticed kind of a positive, I would say, optimistic vibe among the voters. And when I asked around different sources, they attributed this to the wave of optimism set by the course correction initiative launched by His Highness the Emir a few months ago. This initiative apparently restored some trust in the political process. And this, compared to what's happening in the region, it stands out as against the trends in the region, where the public trust in political processes and organizations is at the lowest in general. And the last point I'd like to mention here is the role of women. First of all, there was a number of women candidates. 2 of them made it to the National Assembly. So we've had the chance, seeing women involved in the process itself, in the electoral process itself. So all in all, it was a source of hope, as I mentioned before.
Thank you, Dr. Ili. I would like to move to Mr. Leon Shihabian. How much do you think Kuwait needs an economic reform? Some might argue we are doing fine.
Abdulaziz, thank you for bringing such an esteemed panel together. And thank you for the wonderful work that Reconnaissance does. For those of us watching the Gulf from Washington, it certainly helps us immensely to have a reconnaissance on the scene as it has been in the last few years, particularly since COVID started, and we couldn't get on a plane as easily for a while anyway. So thank you for having us. It was wonderful to join Dr. Ali in Kuwait City last month to be invited to witness Democracy in Action, the Ummah 2022 votes. And thanks for your question. Look, people need jobs. This is an incredibly difficult time that the world has not seen in the last 80 plus years. I think we're heading towards increasing cleavages around the world. And I think that just like no one anticipated COVID, or some people said, oh, it could get bad, but maybe it won't become a pandemic, right? So I feel that's where we are as far as global conflict is concerned. I don't like the trends that I'm seeing internationally. I hope I am not correct. I hope this is not January 2020 and people are going, COVID, yeah, I heard about that, right? So I hope it's not an age of increasingly regional conflicts multiplying in other parts of the world, just like they are now in the case of Russia, Ukraine. Having said that, let's go to Kuwait. Yeah, I agree with Dr. Ali. This is a seminal point. The people have hope. But those of us that like to follow Kuwait, we always think back to the golden era, right? Yeah, it's a little bit before our time, but Kuwait is a trailblazer, not just in having a parliament, but in having the first private, let's say, bourse, right? They are the first to have Wall Street equivalent in the region, right? And they are the first to have a sovereign wealth fund. So all of that is probably history to most Kuwaitis, and something that from a couple of generations ago, but no, this is important. This is part of the fabric of Kuwait, and the country that was a trailblazer could and should be a trailblazer again. And to go back to your question, does the unique Kuwaiti makeup of the ties between the parliament and the government, does that have a big difference, a role to play? Absolutely. Absolutely. If a business consultant is in a room talking to American management or to an American board of directors, the first question is, oh, the Gulf, how stable is it? Well, sir, they've had 6 elections in 10 years. Oh, that doesn't sound stable. No, sir, it is stable because that's part of the way their parliament interacts with their government. Oh, let me remind you, we have elections in the US House of Representatives every 2 years, so they're doing a little better than us, right? So you need people that can tie the Kuwaiti experience to the American experience, and you'll have lots of people on this Zoom call that understand both cultures equally well, starting with the ambassador and with the sheikh, and it's wonderful to share the stage with them. I don't think in my most recent visit to Kuwait, I saw enough to convince me that we are not on the precipice of wonderful changes. What happened in June, the Crown Prince's speech, gave us enough hope that we chose to go and observe the elections. So, yeah, are we on the precipice of another wave of amazing things in Kuwait, another golden era? To be seen, honestly. Is there new Kuwait 2035? Is that vision going to come back? Is there going to be significant work to, on anti-corruption? Is there going to be a more cooperative parliament? Is the government going to be interested in mitigating some of the global risks to have opportunities for employment, we are watching, but certainly there's hope, right? Hope springs eternal.
Thank you, Leon. I would like to start from where you ended with Ambassador Silverman. Ambassador Silverman, with all honesty, how easy or difficult was it to convince American companies, foreign direct investment, to come to Kuwait? I know this has been a struggle for the past 15 years. Our officials continue to carry the narrative of wanting to host a plethora of investment companies in Kuwait.
Right. Thank you, Abdulaziz, for the question. You know, Mr. Shahabian mentioned a series of firsts that Kuwait had done. And there was another one, too, in the economic field about having passing a law that allowed for 100% private ownership of a company a foreign company that invested in Kuwait, as opposed to needing a partner for 50% or whatever the percentage would be. And Kuwait did that before the others did it. Most of the others did it. And it's that kind, you know, we don't have, Abdulaziz, in the United States, we don't have vision statements. We should probably, but we don't. Usually a president will lay out, you know, what they want to do in their term, but there is no Vision 2035 or Vision 2030. I think they're very good things if you abide by them and you don't just use them as a statement of intent, but almost as a roadmap of what you're going to do up until that year. And, you know, maybe 5 years in advance, you're setting Vision 2040. So I think the challenge has been, and I think the Kuwait Direct Investment Promotion Authority has done excellent work on this. But I think what foreign companies need to see is that there is this moving forward, that decisions can be made quickly, that there is a level of certainty, you know, and this is not just in Kuwait and some other place. Certainty is the most important thing for a business. Even if a business knows it might lose a little bit, it might still take a risk. But it's the unknown, you know, that sometimes leads companies not to invest, and that's the most important thing to have. Is ideally when you have some separation of power and a multi-branch system of government, that you have the executive and the legislative branches working together to pass any new legislation. Let me give you one example, in which was a positive one, but needs to be replicated in other areas. We encouraged very hard while I was there for a new law to protect intellectual property. But we were not, you know, so that would hopefully encourage investment. And there had been a law, but we thought it could be a better law, to be honest with you, and do better protection, provide better protection, but not just protection for some foreign company selling products. We were trying to protect the creative works of Kuwaiti citizens, software developers, film producers, whatever, music composers. And working together with the government and the parliament, we were able to get this new law, which was considered an excellent law back in Washington. It raised the standing of Kuwait on certain lists. I won't get into all the details, in certain lists in Washington, which sends a positive signal to investors. But you need to keep building and building upon that, because the real vision is going to be a vision in which Kuwait and many other countries are no longer just producers of petroleum. They have to diversify their economies over the long term, for which you need that kind of investment, whether it be in healthcare, in IT, whatever the case may be. And the educational system plays an extremely important role. So the more that foreign companies see the government and the parliament working together, things working properly, companies are being treated well, and we had some examples while I was there. That's really what they need, because I always said companies are not listening to the U.S. companies, are not listening to the U.S. ambassador, encouraging them to invest. They're looking at the experiences of other companies.
You said many US companies have certain unknowns about Kuwait. Did they share that to you? What is it that they feel is unknown?
Yeah. No, it wasn't an unknown about Kuwait in general. It was more, just generally uncertainty. They're uncertain about the region. They're uncertainty about the, economy of the region. So I wasn't specifically talking about Kuwait in that instance. I was making more general point about uncertainty and making business conditions. And when, for example, Kadipa was working with a company and was very clear in what could be done and how their operations might work, it worked. It worked in terms of investment. If you look at General Electric or other companies, but the key point is that Kuwait needs to, like as others in the region, to diversify their economy. So they have to, governments have to be working all the time. I think there have been advances in cybersecurity, for example, that are important to companies, and then to just make sure that you have an encouraging environment for international foreign business, but of course, not at the expense of the interest of the country, obviously, and the interest of the citizens. And obviously, you can find that happy medium between the company's interest and that. But it, like I said, it needs moving step by step, consistently along an economic path. And every single country is facing this challenge. It's not just a Kuwaiti challenge, but economic. I agree with Mr. Shahabian and even your question, Abdulaziz. The economy is really the center point of all of this.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Dr. Abu Aoun, why are there more states failing than those who are not? And what is the risk of that spreading in the MENA region as well?
Yes, well, the answer is very simple. It's inclusivity. I think that the problem in most of the cases, or the reason why, the lack of economic opportunities is actually leading to conflicts, that economic development in many countries, especially in the MENA region, were not inclusive enough. So in some cases, actually in many cases, they increase the disparity between different segments of the society. And obviously this creates resentment, and resentment leads to conflicts. So inclusivity is the key answer in this context. The other thing, and this is something that I keep repeating, this is where most of the not only governments but also the international community assistance programs fail, is that they focused a lot on generating income, but they did not pay enough attention to the upward social mobility. Young people in the region are not only looking for an income, they are also looking for upward social mobility. They want to see, or they want to figure out, to imagine how the quality of their life will improve over time, right? So you can promise an income, that's nice, that's important, but that's not enough. What is needed in this case is to complement this income by perspectives of social mobility, and this will prevent people from feeling excluded. But also, I mean, it's not a problem in the case of Kuwait, but it is a problem in many other cases. It will also prevent migration from the region to other places.
So since the economy is the focal point, without being objective, with being honest, is a robust, vision-oriented, non-democratic system is better now than democracy that is still trying to find its way in the dark?
Well, first of all, let's agree that the concept that democracy is a one-size-fits-all concept is counterproductive. So rather than just being a model and some structures, democracy is actually, at least from my perspective, a set of norms and practices and values that uphold human dignity. So if you look at it from this case, then in the region we've seen a lot of examples where non-inclusive governance models, or those models that do not uphold human dignity, proved not to be viable. These models create, enough level of resentment against the state and important cracks within the society itself that make the country in general too vulnerable to different risks, including the risk of external interference. And this is where we've seen, a lot of dramatic scenarios, such as, violent regime change, civil wars, disintegration of countries, etc., etc. So, as I said before, democracy is not a one-size-fits-all model. It's not only about holding elections or having specific structures or institutions. It is also about having the right norms and the right values, upholding human dignity and inclusivity. And I would add one more thing, that this is extremely important nowadays, as we're seeing the young generation, taking distance from the traditional concept of political parties, and therefore leading to the rise of populist regimes or populist leaders here and there. So what is really needed at this stage is to encourage homegrown initiatives that would aim at building consensus around a set of inclusive norms. And the second point that I would mention is to think about what model of political parties or political organizations is appealing to young people today.
Thank you, Dr. Ili. I will continue to talk about democracy and Kuwait with Mr. Shahabian. Mr. Shahabian, do you see that Kuwait's system of governance hindering its economic development compared to our Gulf neighbors?
I'm happy to be very blunt. Look, most people in the Gulf and some people in Kuwait don't realize to which extent Kuwait was the trailblazer and the shining beacon for a well-diversified economy and for a country that was truly developed. Now, in the span of a few decades, we went from the most developed Gulf country to the least developed Gulf country. And this is not me saying it, this is the World Bank saying it, and to some extent, the World Economic Forum saying it. Now, it's unfair to blame this on Kuwait's system of governance. I think a lot of Gulf countries said, if Kuwait can do it, why can't I? Right? So the Gulf countries that used to send their merchant families to Kuwait because Kuwait had telex, because Kuwait had a functioning airline that was wonderful. Those Gulf families started staying home because their own countries developed, right? So did Kuwait atrophy? To some extent, and they've surpassed Kuwait. Is the system of governance in Kuwait responsible for this? Perhaps to some extent. Let's not look backwards. Our mission is to look forwards on this panel, which is wonderful. We don't have to read the tea leaves of the government formation. Let's look forward. I think that, some Gulf countries, their system of governance allows them to be more central in their planning. And, as the ambassador alluded to, yeah, I tend to agree. Look, the United Arab Emirates has a centennial committee. Their centennial is in 2071. But they have a panel of technocrats and government bureaucrats that are working on not just planning for the centennial, but the actual celebration. And most people who are part of this panel will not be around to witness this event, which is almost 50 years away. But when your system of governance allows you to be that centrally planned, yes, you can project forward and be more certain. The same can be said about Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, and Oman does its thing, and Oman is certainly making some waves since their most recent change in leadership, right? So
Mr.
where does this leave?
Mr. Shahabian, if I want to go direct into the core and you can say how much of what you told me, you are the one who can decide how much you want to say. Why don't they come to Kuwait?
I think Kuwait just needs to remember that it was a trailblazer for a reason, and all of the core attributes are still in place. It's just a question of willingness to take stock of what we had, where we are, and how we can lead again. And American businesses or businesses anywhere are not going to be the ones to convince Kuwait of this. I think Parliament can look at the ease of doing business that the World Bank publishes, realize that in 2019, Kuwait went up and was one of the top 10 countries anywhere in the world that experienced major amelioration in their space, right? Having said that, even with the 2019 jump of 10 places, Kuwait is the least easy country to do business in the GCC after the amelioration, according to the World Bank from 2020 pre-pandemic. Now, the pandemic intervened, everything changed, but clearly work was done, major reforms occurred, and Kuwait jumped up. Now it is still in last place in the GCC, but again, it used to be in first place in the GCC. All of the attributes are still there. This is a country that can really reclaim a seat and court businesses, whether they are in the US or elsewhere. And they will always find that there's wonderful US diplomats willing to help, as was the case with Ambassador Silverman. Part of the job of any US embassy is to help US businesses find partners and to help mitigate any concerns. So yeah, if someone says Kuwait is open for business, whether it's the government or the government and the parliament ideally, or whether someone says, hey, in addition to courting foreign direct investments, wouldn't it be wonderful if, in keeping with new vision 2035, there are programs for the private sector in Kuwait to claim a piece of the economy? I think that would be ideal, not just looking outside, but looking inwards and seeing how a more robust private sector could help make the country more inclusive, like Dr. Abowen was discussing.
Thank you, Mr. Shahabian. Ambassador Silverman, is our system failed from the beginning? It is not equipped to handle the challenges of 2022? Do you see a consensus ever happening between a parliament and a government?
You want maybe to be concise. To the first one, no. It's not failed. It's not a failed system or a failing system. And to the second answer is yes. Every opportunity is there. There's nothing inherent in the system. No, it can work to maximize economic opportunity, to maximize an effort to diversify. Diversification is not going to happen quickly or overnight, but you start to move into other areas. You have you haven't really mentioned it, but you have a very educated population and good educational institutions. And we've always been very happy in the United States to host Kuwaiti students of higher education in the United States, because they all go back and they have contributed, I think, very successfully to Kuwait. We want to see that continue, but there is nothing inherent in the system at all. It's just a determination in the sentiments that have been expressed earlier this year, to move forward and to work together on policy. If there's one word, it's about policy, and I think it's primarily about economic policy, because all the opportunities are there. For example, you have obviously you have a robust oil and gas sector but looking ahead. So you take your oil sector, while you're exporting, of course, and bringing in revenues and investing those revenues, you're also, for example, looking at what is called blue hydrogen. In other words, the movement from making hydrogen energy out of fossil fuels. You can have green hydrogen as well from solar and wind, and of course you have those resources available in Kuwait as well. So it's just a determination and working together to make those investments most wisely, to do step-by-step preparations for the day when fossil fuels are not going to bring in all the revenues that they are. Although for the time being, of course, they're still very relevant. The revenues are very good, and many other countries would love to be in Kuwait's position economically. But the question is always, each day, what step are you taking policy making to build that environment internally, as Mr. Shahabian says, not just external, not just foreign. I think the foreign investments that have been good for the foreign investors and for Kuwait, and the opportunities are great. For example, Kuwaitis get medical treatment in the United States, and they've come to the United States to be treated, or to Europe. But in the long term, the future is that there will be such cooperation between healthcare institutions in the United States and Kuwait and all these other countries and European countries, so that in essence, doctors will be working. You may have real-time virtual cooperation in an operation, actually, a medical operation. So this is the future, and it's very doable. So there's no reason why there shouldn't be working together on economic policy related issues.
You said earlier in one of your answers that U.S. companies don't look into what the U.S. ambassador says as
Right.
a way to attract them to come to a country. What should the parliament do? What should our new parliament do to advance Kuwait? What should the role of the parliament be?
So I'm going to say something, but not knowing whether this is already going on, Abdulaziz, because I don't follow it that closely. So are there parliamentarians and the government departments, whether it's the finance ministry or the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, are they talking all together about the investment environment? I think they are. And then you have, of course, the prominent role of KDIPA in all of this, that can actually can help bring everyone together. So to make sure that the investment laws are solid and everything is transparent, and the incentives for any company are decided by the government, and maybe Parliament will be talking to the government about that. It's not for me to say what specific incentive is really necessary, but if companies are coming, generally treated fairly and making a profit, then they're happy, and there are many experiences like that, but there obviously can be more experiences like that. But the question is, can you operate your business with relatively, with the minimum of a bureaucracy to it and red tape, as we call it in the United States, and whether pay attention to the stories that the ongoing relationships with businesses. You make sure that those businesses are happy. Kuwait can't obviously make sure that they're profitable. That's a business, those are based on business decisions. But if the companies are satisfied, then that's what they're telling others, or when the other companies' potential investors are investigating and looking behind, that they'll see that and they'll say, okay, this is good. Because the other aspects, having these elections go forward very smoothly and things like that, having an educated population, by the way, businessmen love the whole Diwania system, as do I, in Kuwait. I mean, it's not a trivial thing. It's important to create that atmosphere. So the elements are there.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Mr. Shahabian, smooth working relationship between the parliament and the government a prerequisite for stability and economic development? How important is that?
Look, it's a democracy. There's some institutional memory, but it's all over the place. There's examples of cooperation. There's examples of parliaments not serving their full term, up to 50% of them. But anytime you cooperate between the government and the parliament, I think the Kuwaiti people, particularly the young, are going to be paying attention. If you can find a way to say, it's a dangerous world out there, and there's certainly uncertainty around us. So let's agree as a parliament that represents the people and as a government that represents the people in a system that is incredibly attuned to the people's needs. I can't emphasize this enough. One of the best attributes of the Kuwaiti system for me is that if enough people are organized, the Emir hears about it, there's not a lot of bureaucratic inertia, change happens. This is, I don't know whether you want to call it like a direct democracy or truly a constitutional monarchy playing its role, but this is a beautiful attribute of Kuwait for me. And this has been the case even before there was a functioning parliament. So to answer your question, Abdulaziz, absolutely. If the government and the parliament can work together hand in hand and say, these are the 5 main problems that we are facing at a time of global uncertainty, and we're going to work together, I think they will find that the people are suddenly paying more attention and are willing to lend a helping hand to help Kuwait become or embark on its second wave of izdihar. There is no English word. Development is too small to capture this, right? But I'm bullish on what can be accomplished in Kuwait if the government and the parliament can agree on 5 key problems that need to be faced now in the spirit of collegiality and cooperation and institutional dialogue. And having said that, it's very easy to diagnose it for Kuwait. Here I am sitting in Washington, and we have incredibly acrimonious ties between our legislative body and our executive body. So it's always easy to give advice when it's somewhere very far away.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shihabian. My last question to Dr. Ili is about Kuwait. What are your optimistic views, pessimistic views about Kuwait, the democracy, and the parliamentary experience?
One idea first is that the path to democracy is always a dynamic process. It's never a static process. So democratic practices or democratic trends can go up and down depending on other contextual factors. Now, compared to other monarchies in the Gulf, the parliamentary activity in Kuwait is definitely more systemic and more vivid. However, I do think that it did not reach yet a stage where one can envisage a full-scale accountability of the executive in front of the legislative branch. But again, compared to other places in the region, there's more scrutiny. The executive branch is subject to more scrutiny in Kuwait than other places. What I would like to emphasize here is that the recent surge in the public trust that I mentioned before, I referred before to kind of an increased public trust in the political process as a result of the course correction initiative. I think this recent surge in public trust is an important asset that needs to be used and built on in order to sanitize the political practices in Kuwait at all levels, executive, legislative, judiciary, etc. Yeah, I mean, this is in a nutshell what I would say about the democracy in Kuwait compared to other places. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will have to give Ambassador Silverman and then Mr. Leon just 1 minute, what is your advice to the new government and the new parliament?
I would say, Abdulaziz, take advantage of this opportunity. You know, there are economic difficulties all around the world. You're facing a need over time to diversify in the economy, but that is not a threat. That is an opportunity, and it's a responsibility as well. And just to try to create, and I think Mr. Shahabian actually alluded to this, find a few very discrete economic related issues, policy issues on which to move forward on, that you can reach a consensus on. And a policy with a consensus in a country with some democratic traditions is stronger than, you know, in my mind, of course, as an American, than just an edict or a decree. When you have that buy-in from the population, it's a very important strength of a country. But find a few discrete, detailed policy issues that take you closer to that goal that you created for yourself in Vision 2035 or other visions. You don't have to, you know, it doesn't have to just be those that were there, because the vision may change from year to year. And take that responsibility and that opportunity to work together to reach out and maximize Kuwait's connections with the outside, which Kuwaitis have done ever since their history.
Thank you, Your Excellency. The same question to you, the last question, Mr. Shahabian.
Well, I agree wholeheartedly with what the ambassador said. You know, this is the point usually where everything that needs to be said has been said, but not everyone has said it yet. So I fully support what the ambassador said. I will only add, don't be strangers to us in Washington. I think it's time to reintroduce Kuwait to Washingtonians that are younger. So, you know, government delegations and parliamentary delegations, I think they can make the best out of having a brand new ambassador, a Kuwaiti ambassador, talk about change. After 21 years of wonderful representation, now there is a new ambassador, a new Kuwaiti ambassador in Washington, Ambassador Jassem Boudawi. He is someone who knows Washington well. He served here previously. So having members of parliament, having ministers come and reintroduce Kuwait to Washington at a time when there's a new ambassador, boy, wouldn't that be wonderful? And let me just say, what do I mean by this? Having you here, Abdulaziz, has been amazing. You know, you've decided to spend some time here in Washington, and it's been great. You are introducing Kuwait to Washington policymakers that maybe have a dated impression of what Kuwait is. So I welcome this sort of exchange, and I hope that newly elected members of parliament will find time to visit us here in Washington, just like you have made the time, just like Sheikh Sabah has made the time to engage, because at the end of the day, we need these people-to-people exchanges, or how the State Department would classify as public diplomacy, right? So this is wonderful. Let's keep talking, would be my advice to both the parliament and the new government whenever they are nominated again, I guess.
Thank you. Thank you.
Abdulaziz, just let me say, Mr. Shahabian's point, I agree 1,000%. Don't wait for Americans to come to Kuwait. Ahlan wa sahlan fi Washington, or Los Angeles, or Boston, my hometown, or wherever.
Thank you. We will now go to the closing statements by my dear friend Sheikh Sabah Mohammed Sabah Salim, the co-founder of Harvard Club of Kuwait, and he was its president for 2 years. And we will listen to his remarks and his insights. Sheikh Mohammed Sabah, you're on.
Thank you, Abdulaziz, for your kind invitation, and Thank you to our panelists for their wide-reaching discussion that we all no doubt have learned from, and that honestly has cast new perspectives on the way we see political dynamics play out. Abdulaziz, you're a dear friend, and I know that you know I'm in the Ministry of Defense. So because it's 2022 and this is going to be all over the internet, I have to preface my comments with a quick disclaimer by saying these views are my own and do not reflect those of the government of Kuwait nor the Ministry of Defense. So Abdulaziz asked me to provide some closing thoughts on what we've listened to today. And to that, I'd just like to pick up on a couple of themes that were discussed during the seminar. And obviously, far be it for me to lecture such a wealth of information and intellect we find in our panelists. But perhaps for posterity's sake, it may benefit someone who might come across this one day. So to understand the macro view of the current situation, we must look at the geopolitical environment that brought us here. Some view Kuwait as an anachronism embodied, born out of the imperial world and operating in the modern globalized international system. It struggles to navigate the complexities of the modern order. But I contend that these growing pains, you might call them, or the difficult gestational period of our young democracy, is often mischaracterized as backwardness or incompatibility with the international order. But what is the international system or the international order? Many experts argue that we still live in a timeless system of states that have been in existence since the Westphalian era, and that they have evolved to the current globalized system of sovereign states. But any discussion of geopolitics requires a multidisciplinary approach, requiring a little bit of history, some engineering, economics, and even sociology in order to understand the social forces that undergird the modern world order. And in my opinion, there's been two big things that have happened over the last 100 years. Number one is financial globalization. Ambassador Silverman, you spoke about this. The post-1945 integration of economies and markets has changed how we fundamentally see states. Bretton Woods set the scene for international trade, international investments, and gave rise to multinational corporations. Here I think of Gazprom and Shell. They are multinational independents, but still tied very much to state power. And the second big thing, I think the second big social transformation, equally as important, is the development of the online world. So entirely post-1945, this was fundamental to the changing character of geopolitics, and it gave rise to populist ideologies, terror networks, and now we see it used in surrogate warfare. And Kuwait honestly has not been immune to these changes. Mr. Shahabin, you made a point about the fragile nature of the globalized world. And indeed, in his book, Destined for War, my professor at the Kennedy School, Graham Allison, posited that a rising power rivals and challenges a ruling power, resulting in a catastrophic war and mayhem. Indeed, it seems that the Thucydides trap is playing out just as he wrote, and this can't be more evident than what we're witnessing in the world today. It is therefore inevitable that the events in Europe will have far-reaching national security implications. Indeed, the populist forces in many European countries are on the march. The rise of populist movements, which is not simply a European or American phenomenon, will have profound effects on the very foundation of global peace. To be sure, the post-World War II architecture of peace and prosperity governed by the UN and Bretton Woods are under extreme pressure. And again, Kuwait is not immune to these movements. Which brings me to my final concluding thought. And it was a quote by Antonio Gramsci, an Italian thinker, who wrote, "The old world is dying and the new world has not yet been born." Gramsci was talking at the end of the 1920s, where the age of borderless travel, imperial administration, and growing economic globalization that began in 1870 was coming to an end. And yet the new world of large states with high public spending was still a distant prospect. Today, we're in a similar world. We know the old way of doing things has gone, maybe forever, but we're not sure how to find our new way in the new world, or indeed what the new world looks like. The changes are in many ways most acute in energy, and this is to your point, Ambassador Silverman, that the age of hydrocarbons is giving way to a new world of low carbon, even no carbon technologies. And I don't need to tell you all the statistics that this year, despite the energy crisis and what's happening in Ukraine, the energy sector of the S&P 500 shrank to just 3.7% of the overall index when it was 13% 10 years ago. There's a substantial energy revolution underway. Experts say it'll take 25 years before clean energy goes to 25% of total consumption. Others think it'll be sooner. In that world, there will be abundant oil, and it may even still be a cornerstone for activities like aviation or trucking, if not replaced by hydrogen. But even there's a spike, even if there's a short-term spike for oil, ultimately the price of oil will fall. As we know, the Stone Age did not end for a lack of stones. And our biggest customers are already pushing ahead. In Germany, solar panels have already created tens of thousands of jobs. In the US, there are already twice as many jobs in solar than in coal. China announced at the UN that it's pursuing a carbon neutral policy by 2060. So this success creates its own momentum and its own interest groups, which will push for further change. Renewable energy development will not slow, but will snowball. Energy companies and others are investing in technologies like AI, which will further speed energy development. At financial firms, there is pressure not just to divest from firms associated with fossil fuels, but to reinvest those proceeds in new technologies. And I'll leave you as a final thought, just a couple of questions to ponder. What are we doing in Kuwait to increase our resilience to these forces? Is there a roadmap to reconcile the irreconcilables and restore stability? Or will we see an overturning of the Arab exception as posited by Hazem Saghiya, in which he contends that Arabs do in fact have the courage in carrying out collective social revolutions inspired by great ideas? And here the question is that if they are successful, do they have the resources and capabilities to build afresh these democratic republics they so long for? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your insightful, impressive comment. In conclusion, I thank all of our panelists, Ambassador Lawrence Silverman, Dr. Ili Abu Aoun, Leon Shahabian, and Sheikh Mohammed Sabah al-Salim. Reconnaissance research is a bridge of communication, and we hope that we can connect Kuwaitis with people from all around the world, as much as we hope people from all around the world to look positively about our country. We are inclusive, and we hope that if there is anybody with experience, knowledge, or merit who would like to utilize our platform, we are able to host a plethora of subjects and topics in the future, just like as we did in the past. Thank you all for joining us. مع السلامة.
شكرا. مع السلامة. الله معكم.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.